Democrats love fascism. I've said this before. I think that it betrays a poor imagination on your part if you think that the behavior of the Democrats has to do with duplicitousness. Duplicity? I think it's duplicity. It's not Democrats being secret buddies with fascists. It's really not. Liberals are just like that. You don't understand because you're young and a radical, which is good. You should be a radical. But the liberal political mind state is one which believes that there are fundamental, universal elements of civil. They think that the right people will always win out in the end. That taking the high road always leads you down the right path. That abstemiousness carries its own rewards. That patience and deliberate, virtuous abstemiousness always pay off because people who are uncivil, people who break the rules, at the end of the day, they lose. They are Pete Buttigieg. Think about Pete Buttigieg. People for whom politics is not about historical materialism or about power, but rather about, mason jars, unshrouded light bulbs hanging from ceilings, and pithy Obama-esque speeches about hopes, virtues, lights, justice being touched from the hill of the America's life's whatever. Yeah, go watch The West Wing if you really want. If you really want to see how liberals think, go watch The West Wing. Or you know what? You know what else you can, because a lot of you haven't watched The West Wing. Have you ever watched Parks and Recreation? Imagine Leslie Knope taken out of her universe and put into ours. Imagine how dejected and impotent and weak she would be, constantly being tread upon by people who don't give a shit about her or humans in general. That's what, like, the liberal is. The best liberal is a well-intentioned, pure-minded weakling in a world of lions. That's what they are. That's the best of them. The best of them, virtuous people who do not know the game that they are playing, who don't understand the world that they're in. Of course, this is a varying thing. There are liberals who are fully aware of the threat of fascism. This is obviously sort of a gradient. I'm talking about the pure liberal right now, the archetypical liberal, the platonic liberal. It doesn't make them an ally to fascism. Not always, at least. It doesn't make them a bad person either. It just means that they aren't really aware of the nature of power. They aren't really aware of the stakes at hand. They have too much faith in the institutions, too much trust in the historical inevitability of the prevalence of the civil and the decent and the noble-hearted. Some of them will be allies to fascism, but unfortunately, I think liberal is just too broad of a term, Liberal refers to so many things. It's the philosophy of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment spawned so much of modern economic, political, and philosophical discourse that, like, liberal can refer to so many things. Are there liberals who are primarily interested in the maintenance of their businesses and will vote primarily on tax legislation and little else? Yes, there are. I don't know if you could fairly call one a liberal who would collaborate with the Nazi regime back in the 30s or whatever, if it meant saving your business. I think there are liberals, and then there are people for whom liberal society is convenient. Does that make any sense? This is very common with fascist coups. They appeal towards a sort of embittered or greedy or desperate upper class. Usually the bourgeois side with the fascist revolutionaries or the fascist coup because they were promised, compliant labor conditions, to put it lightly. But I don't think those big business people who side with the fascists, I don't really think they're liberals. Like, I don't think these people are all gung-ho, tolerance, progressive, and then the fascists come along and then they're like, "Oh yeah, we're totally okay with death camps. Just keep our taxes low." I don't think they're liberals really. I think they're mostly apolitical outside their own power and self-betterment. And when chips are on the line, like, they'll do anything to maintain that. But that's not an ideological bias towards liberalism. That's just surfing the Kali Yuga of liberalism until the next wave comes along. The only reason I'm saying this is because I think sometimes, like, the discourse gets a little bit muddied when people are like, well, liberals side with fascists. Well, not really. The fascists kill liberals, It's more like oftentimes the liberals are too weak, inept, or naive to do anything about the fascists. And there are people who weren't openly fascist who felt it easier to work with liberals beforehand, who will then find it easier to work with fascists when the opportunity presents itself. Liberals are often useful idiots or inept but well-meaning allies. And they can be made, what's the opposite of inept? Ept? Disinepted. They can be made competent allies under the right conditions, I think, I think it's also, adept. Of course, adept. Inept, adept. What an odd, yeah. A lot of old liberals are hard to move, though. That they are. But keep in mind, folks, look at the French resistance, Look at the revolutionary cells within Nazi Germany, France, Poland, Northern Africa, Italy. Look at what was going on there. Are many of these groups leftists? Yes, they are. Many of them were socialists, but not all of them. In fact, probably a minority of them. The majority of people who were fighting on the ground in revolutionary cells against the fascist occupation were probably liberals. They were just anti-Nazi. People misunderstand. Being anti-fascist doesn't necessarily mean being a socialist, You could be a liberal and be ideologically opposed to fascism. In fact, being a liberal means you are ideologically opposed to fascism. I think being a socialist makes you a better anti-fascist because you're better able to critique the underlying material conditions that lead to fascism, and you're generally more aware of the nature of power and the accumulation of material power. But you can be a liberal and an anti-fascist. I don't think those are mutually exclusive at all. I say this to remind all of you that Democrats, while they do suck, are a particularly inept wing of the supermajority of this country, which is liberal. The majority of this country is liberal. This country is full of liberals, and these liberals are ideologically opposed to fascism. How effective they'll be in any real dispute, to an extent, comes down to us. We are shepherds. Ever since the great battle between fascism and socialism began, the real war, it has been the prerogative of socialists and anarchists and anti-capitalists of all kinds to guide public attention against fascism, to lead that effort, to convince people, to educate people. Are we appreciated for it? No. Do we often succeed? No. We get our asses kicked from time to time. But it is still our job. Socialists, anarchists, union leaders, and organizers have been prominent in anti-fascist action in America for as long as that has been a thing, prominent in resistance cells across occupied Europe, prominent in denazification of Germany. It's just something that we seem to keep finding ourselves doing. So take pleasure in that role. Make it your job to talk with liberals and convince them. Why do you think I've been adopting the rhetoric that I have over the past couple of weeks and months so aggressively? My primary concern is not entertaining or appeasing or educating the socialists in my audience, because you are socialists. We already agree. I know where you stand. My interest is convincing liberals how bad things are capable of getting, so that they will be more aggressive advocates for their rights and for our rights. Should that ever be necessary, which it's most certainly fucking is. That's what I care about first and foremost. So just keep that in mind. Whenever you are feeling horrible about the future of this country, please just remember that you are in America here. You're sharing a space with literally hundreds of millions of human beings who are ideologically opposed to the tenets of fascism. A lot of it is just guiding people to the appropriate response to the existence of those things. Think about it like climate change, right? The vast majority of people, outside of the fundamentalist Christians, of which there are maybe, I don't actually remember, 20 to 50 million in this country, hundreds of millions of people in this country, are ideologically opposed to the consequences of climate change. Sea levels rising, drought, famine, tornadoes, hurricanes, tsunamis, floods. You line all these things up. Are you in favor of droughts, hurricanes, tsunamis, floods, blah, blah, blah? They say, no, probably not. They are opposed to what will happen. The goal is to convince them that it is necessary to be active in that opposition. And the United States, outside of recent backsliding caused by an undemocratic, Republican-controlled Supreme Court, has generally moved left in its opinion on climate change. You have to be the advocate. You have to be an evangelical for anti-fascism. You understand? You have to be a preacher. They don't care about arguments. You need to instill fear, unfortunately. The arguments should make people feel fearful because what is happening is scary. But that's still an argument. You seriously underestimate how hard they will hold on to the idea that it can't happen here even as it happens here? Don't tell me I underestimate it. You think I don't know? You have to try anyway. Sorry, throwing your arms up in the air and going, oops, I tried, is not a reaction to great crisis that people will respect in the future, you know? I'm afraid you're just going to have to keep trying. You can complain about it all you like, but you have to keep trying. You don't get to not try. Again, think of the odds that our ancestors worked against, you know? All those union organizers and socialists on the streets of New York back in 1908, fighting for an end to child labor or for weekends or whatever. All those men died of black lung with broken spines in their 40s, you know? They lived miserable lives. But we now get weekends. It's about keeping the chain going. Pass the bucket.